My name is Lillian Moore. I am 31 years old. I grew up in a quiet little town called Willow Creek, Oregon, a place where the air smelled of pine trees and the neighbors waved at each other like family. Dear listener, thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let me know in the comments what country you are listening from. I truly appreciate it. Enjoy the story. I was born into a humble family. My father was a mechanic who could fix anything, from a broken engine to a leaky faucet. My mother worked long nights cleaning offices, always making sure we had warmth, food, and love. Money was scarce, but laughter filled our home. We did not have diamonds, designer clothes, or private cars, but we had integrity, respect, and an unspoken bond that nothing could break. I had always believed that love and patience could carry anyone through life. But when I met Ethan Holloway, I realized that love alone is not always enough. Ethan was different from anyone I had ever known. Tall, handsome, confident, his voice carried authority, his laugh commanded attention, and yet his heart was gentle. I fell for him completely, imagining a life where love could bridge any gap, including the gap between our worlds. The Holloway family, however, was a world I had never belonged to, and the truth hit me the day I first stepped into their mansion in San Francisco. The house was enormous marble floors that reflected crystal chandeliers, hallways lined with priceless paintings, furniture polished so perfectly that my reflection stared back at me like a silent judge. I had imagined grandeur before, but this was something entirely different. The walls themselves seemed to whisper that I was not meant to be there. My husband's mother, Vivian Holloway, was a woman whose presence could freeze a room without a single word. She was always impeccably dressed, with her hair perfectly styled, jewelry glinting, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. That smile was my first warning. Behind it was a razor-sharp scrutiny that could slice through confidence and dignity alike. I realized quickly that in the Holloway household, perfection was the currency, and I was not wealthy in that sense. Ethan, sweet Ethan, tried to shield me. In private, he held my hand, whispered comforting words, and reassured me that everything would be fine. But in public, with his mother present, he was silent. It was as if even his love had boundaries in that house. I learned something crucial then. Love could not protect me from family. It could only remind me what I was losing, slowly, day by day. The first week was a trial. Vivian did not yell or humiliate openly. She didn't need to. Her methods were quiet, surgical. She would correct the way I held my fork, the way I poured tea, the way I smiled at guests. She would comment on my wardrobe, on my accent, even on my background. Every word was carefully measured to remind me that I was not from her world, that I was from Oregon, small and insignificant in comparison to the polished universe she inhabited. Ethan and I had planned a quiet wedding, simple and full of love. I had imagined a life of shared dreams, of walking together through hardships, holding each other when the world grew cold. But the Holloway mansion was an entirely different life, a world where my heart, my history, my very presence seemed to be a mistake. I remember vividly the first dinner we had with the family. I wore a soft dress from Oregon, simple but elegant. Vivian looked me up and down, her eyes scanning me like a museum curator judging a painting that did not meet her standards. She asked polite questions, but each compliment was layered with judgment. "This is Lillian, Ethan's wife from Oregon," she said to the guests, her tone sweet but precise. My hometown had become a weapon in her hands, a reminder that I was not one of them. I smiled, nodded, and kept my voice gentle. I had learned quickly that argument, confrontation, or even visible sadness would only make me more vulnerable. Patience was my armor. I convinced myself that if I endured, if I persisted, the walls around this family might eventually soften. Days passed like this, each one heavier than the last. Vivian's subtle manipulations became a constant presence. A misplaced comment here, a corrective glance there, whispers in the staff room. I realized that survival in the Holloway house required vigilance, awareness, and a steel-trap mind. I could no longer rely solely on love or kindness. I had to become strategic, careful, and invisible in some ways, yet assertive in others. One afternoon, I overheard Ethan speaking with a business associate. His voice was low, anxious, constrained. "Yes, Mother expects. Yes, I understand. I'll take care of it." I froze in the hallway, my hands clutching the rail. I realized then that Vivian's influence extended even into decisions that affected our lives, decisions that should have been ours alone. The house was not just a home, it was a kingdom, and I was an unwelcome visitor trying not to offend the queen. Even the staff played a role. My personal assistant, Clara Jennings, seemed friendly, helpful, and attentive, guiding me through the labyrinthine rules of the mansion. But one day I overheard her speaking quietly with another staff member. "She'll never fit in here," Clara said. "Poor girl from Oregon, she doesn't know what she's stepped into." That moment broke something inside me. Even someone I trusted had been subtly reinforcing the invisible walls separating me from this family. Despite all this, I clung to love. I clung to Ethan. I clung to the hope that patience and perseverance could win hearts. I told myself that enduring these trials would someday make me stronger, that I could survive without losing myself entirely. Yet every smile I forced, every correction I endured, every whispered insult chipped away at my spirit, leaving me fragile but still standing. Nights were the hardest. Alone in our bedroom, the silence became suffocating. I would look at the city lights of San Francisco through our window, each flickering light a reminder of a world outside the mansion that did not know my pain. I would whisper to myself, "I am Lillian Moore. I am not invisible. I am not weak. I will endure." These words were my anchor in the storm of indifference and silent cruelty. The Holloway mansion was a gilded cage. Each day, I navigated its intricate rules, each room a battlefield, each smile from Vivian a test of my resilience. My efforts to be kind, graceful, and patient were met with scrutiny, yet I refused to break. I was determined to find my place, to assert my identity, even if it had to be from the shadows. I started observing everything, Vivian's subtle cues, the staff's reactions, Ethan's hesitations. I learned how the household operated, how the power dynamics worked, and how to navigate them without provoking open hostility. Each small victory, a polite word, a gently defended opinion, a minor task done correctly, felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself in a place that constantly tried to strip me bare. And yet, despite my endurance, the loneliness was suffocating. Every glance from Vivian, every whispered word from Clara, every anxious sigh from Ethan reminded me that I was not truly part of this family. I realized that in order to survive, I needed not just patience and strategy, but strength of spirit, cunning, and resilience I had never imagined. One evening, I found a hidden letter addressed to Ethan, its envelope embossed with gold. The letter contained instructions, warnings, and subtle expectations from Vivian, emphasizing family image over happiness, obedience over love. I sank to the floor, the weight of realization pressing me down. Everything I had endured, every cold glance, every polite criticism, every subtle humiliation made sense now. I was never truly wanted. I was tolerated, a test, a placeholder for the perfect daughter-in-law Vivian believed would someday take my place. Tears fell freely that night, uncontrolled, raw, and unashamed. I wept for the woman I had been, for the dreams I had carried from Willow Creek, and for the harsh reality I now faced. Yet even in despair, I found a spark of defiance. I whispered to myself, "I will not vanish quietly. I will carve a place for myself, even if it must be from the shadows of their indifference. I am Lillian Moore, and I will survive." And so began my journey into a world of subtle cruelty, silent wars, and hidden betrayals. A world where love alone was not enough, where patience was tested daily, and where survival required courage I had only just begun to discover. The first few months in the Holloway mansion had left me drained, emotionally battered, and constantly on edge. Each morning I woke up with a tight knot in my chest, a quiet dread creeping over me like fog in the hills of Willow Creek. I had thought that love alone could protect me from cruelty, from subtle humiliation, and from the cold, polished walls of a world so far removed from my small-town roots. But love, I learned, was not enough. Ethan tried to help in his own quiet way. He whispered words of comfort in our private moments, held my hand tightly at night, and reminded me that I was not alone. But Vivian's influence in that house was omnipresent, silent yet suffocating. She never had to raise her voice. A look, a gentle tilt of the head, a carefully placed remark in passing, and I would feel my confidence crumble. The house was her kingdom, and I was an intruder walking on glass. One afternoon, I was tidying the library, arranging the books on the shelves, when I overheard a conversation between Ethan and one of his business associates. His voice was low, strained, as if he were walking on thin ice. "Yes, Mother expects, yes, I understand, I'll handle it." My fingers froze on the spine of a heavy leather-bound book. The words confirmed a fear I had begun to sense. Vivian's control extended beyond our daily lives, touching even decisions that should have belonged solely to Ethan and me. The mansion was a labyrinth of silent rules and unspoken expectations. I was learning quickly that every word, every gesture, every movement I made was observed, judged, and interpreted. A misplaced expression, a poorly timed laugh, even a quiet sigh could be twisted into evidence of inadequacy. I had to master the art of moving through the house like a shadow, visible, yet unnoticed, respectful, yet cautiously assertive. Ethan and I shared a small apartment in Willow Creek before our marriage. In that apartment, love was enough. Mistakes were met with patience. Laughter softened arguments, and tears were comforted, not punished. But in the Holloway mansion, love was fragile and easily overshadowed by pride, wealth, and expectation. Every effort I made to be kind, gracious, and patient was measured, often found lacking, and sometimes twisted to highlight my outsider status. The real torment came from the subtleties, the words not spoken, the judgments not voiced, the glances that carried more venom than any accusation. Vivian Holloway was a master of silent manipulation. She would smile while speaking, a carefully rehearsed expression of politeness that concealed her true intent. She would make small adjustments in the household, instructing the staff to rearrange items, to emphasize my mistakes, to subtly undermine me, and I would spend hours trying to undo the invisible corrections she made without my knowledge. Even the staff, who appeared friendly and loyal to me, were instruments in her quiet war. My personal assistant, Clara Jennings, had seemed kind, guiding me through the routines of a household so foreign to me. But one day I overheard her whispering to another staff member, "She'll never fit in here. Poor thing, from Oregon, she doesn't understand what she's walked into." I felt my heart sink. Even those I trusted were pawns in Vivian's careful orchestration. Despite all this, I clung to love, to Ethan, to the hope that things could change, to the belief that patience could soften hearts. But patience alone was not enough. Every morning, I would wake with a resolve to endure, to observe, to survive. Every night, I would cry quietly in the solitude of my bedroom, letting tears fall for the woman I had been before this life, for the dreams that had brought me here, and for the harsh reality I faced daily. One evening, Vivian invited distant relatives for a luncheon. I spent hours preparing, arranging flowers, polishing silverware, and cooking dishes that reminded me of Willow Creek. I hoped to show a piece of my past, my roots, my love for Ethan, in the hope of earning a small measure of acceptance. But Vivian's intentions were clear from the moment the guests arrived. She introduced me with exaggerated sweetness, emphasizing my humble origins in a way that highlighted the gap between me and their polished, wealthy world. The relatives smiled politely, nodding as I served the meal, but I could feel their eyes, trained by Vivian's subtle cues, weighing me, comparing me, and finding me wanting. That night, after the guests had left, Ethan sat with me in the study, his face etched with concern. "I hate that she treats you this way," he said quietly. "I wish I could stop it. I feel helpless." I looked at him, the love I felt warring with the frustration and sadness that had become constant companions. "Do you think love is enough, Ethan?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Do you think it can shield me from her?" His silence was the only answer I received. Weeks passed, and the subtle pressures intensified. Vivian's critiques became more sophisticated, wrapped in compliments and guidance that always carried an undercurrent of control. She praised me for my efforts in public, only to remind me privately that I was still from Oregon, still a novice, still inferior in ways I could not always articulate. I began noticing small betrayals from unexpected places. Clara Jennings, my assistant, who had seemed a friend, reported my minor mistakes to Vivian. Other staff members, initially neutral, were drawn into Vivian's web, their loyalty to her unquestionable. I realized then that survival required not only endurance but cunning. I had to learn to navigate this world with subtlety, to assert myself quietly, and to protect the fragile parts of myself that Vivian could not control. One evening, I discovered that a small personal journal I had kept since childhood was missing. It contained memories, reflections, and secrets I had never shared with anyone. I suspected Vivian had seen it. She understood that my inner world was my sanctuary, and by taking or reading it, she claimed dominion over even the smallest piece of my identity. I sat on my bed, the weight of that realization pressing down on me, and whispered to the empty room, "I am still me. I will survive. I will endure." Small victories became my lifeline. I learned to assert myself in ways that were invisible to Vivian's scrutiny, subtle corrections here, gentle expressions of opinion there, moments where I could reclaim my voice without inviting punishment. Each success, no matter how minor, reminded me that I was not powerless, that even in this gilded cage, I could find pieces of freedom. But even as I adapted, the emotional strain was relentless. Every glance from Vivian, every whispered word, every uncertain look from Ethan reminded me of my precarious position. The mansion, with all its wealth and grandeur, was a place where love was conditional, patience was tested, and resilience was demanded. I understood now that this was a war of endurance, a test of spirit, and a challenge that would shape the woman I would become. One night, as I lay awake in the darkness, I reflected on my journey. I had come from Willow Creek with dreams of love, hope, and simplicity. I had married Ethan with the belief that love could overcome status, kindness could soften pride, and patience could melt indifference. Yet here, in the Holloway mansion, I learned that the world operated on rules far different from those of my childhood. I whispered into the night, "I will not vanish quietly. I will carve a place for myself in this house, in this world, and in my own life. They may try to break me, but they will never own me. I am Lillian Moore, and I will survive." Life in the Holloway mansion had become a delicate balance of survival, strategy, and silent endurance. Every day was a test, every glance a potential threat, every smile a carefully calculated move. I had learned to navigate the invisible rules of the house, to speak with caution, to move with grace, and yet the feeling of being an outsider never left me. Each day reminded me that I was tolerated, never accepted. Ethan remained my anchor, the one constant in the swirling storm of the Holloway world. He tried to protect me, tried to shield me from his mother's subtle manipulations, but the mansion was his mother's kingdom, and even he could not stand against her completely. His love was a lifeline, but love alone could not erase the invisible chains that bound me. It was during one of those long, silent evenings that I began to understand just how deep the Holloway influence ran. I was in the library, attempting to read a book, when I noticed a faint shimmer on the polished desk. A letter had been left there unsigned, but carefully placed so that it would catch my attention. The handwriting was familiar, precise, elegant, and cold. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It contained instructions, subtle warnings, and reminders of the family's expectations. "Remember your place," it read. "Do not overstep. The Holloway name is fragile. Your compliance ensures your continued presence." I sank into the chair, the words pressing against my chest like a weight I could not lift. It was as I had suspected. Every move I made was observed, measured, and judged. The following days intensified the pressure. Vivian's presence was constant, her subtle manipulations growing more sophisticated. She praised me for minor accomplishments, only to follow up with reminders that I was still an outsider. Every gesture I made was examined, every word carefully dissected. I realized that the mansion was more than a home. It was a battlefield, and I was navigating it as best I could. Then came the betrayal I hadn't anticipated from within my own circle. Clara Jennings, my personal assistant, whose guidance I had trusted, began reporting my minor errors to Vivian. Small things, like the placement of a vase or the arrangement of silverware, were exaggerated and shared as evidence of my incompetence. I felt a cold wave of disbelief. Even those I thought were allies could be instruments of control. I confronted Clara privately one afternoon. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and sadness. She looked at me with a mix of pity and calculation. "I'm just doing my job," she said smoothly. "Mother expects perfection. You must understand it's not personal." Her words cut deeper than any insult. In that moment, I realized that the Holloway household was a world where loyalty was conditional, Obedience was paramount, and kindness could be exploited as weakness. Ethan noticed my growing anxiety, and his worry was palpable. "I hate seeing you like this," he said quietly one evening as we sat together in the dim glow of the bedroom lamp. "I wish I could protect you from everything, from her, from the expectations, from the constant pressure." I took his hand in mine, feeling the warmth of his reassurance. "I know you're trying," I whispered, "but love alone isn't enough here. I have to learn to survive this world on my own terms." It was then that I decided I could no longer remain passive. I would endure, yes, but I would also act. I began observing more closely Vivian's habits, her routines, the way she communicated silently with staff, the subtle patterns that governed the household. I started to anticipate her moves, to prepare for them, to find small ways to assert myself without provoking confrontation. One afternoon, I noticed that Vivian had assigned me an impossible task, organizing a guest luncheon with such precision that even minor errors would be magnified. She watched silently as I prepared the room, inspecting each detail with a critical eye. I felt my chest tighten, but I reminded myself of the small victories I had achieved, the subtle ways I had reclaimed a sense of agency in this house. The luncheon began, and as expected, Vivian's scrutiny was relentless. She whispered suggestions to staff, redirected my actions without overt confrontation, and subtly highlighted mistakes in front of the guests. I maintained my composure, following her directions carefully while ensuring the meal was served perfectly. The guests, oblivious to the tension, praised the presentation, complimented the food, and smiled politely. I forced my own smile, masking the fury and humiliation simmering inside me. After the luncheon, Vivian approached me with her trademark sweet smile. "You did well, Lillian," she said, her tone measured. "For someone from Oregon." The words, though ostensibly a compliment, carried an unmistakable sting. She had reminded everyone present that I was an outsider, a woman from a humble background attempting to enter a world she had never belonged to. That night I sat alone in the library, tears streaming down my face. I whispered to the empty room, "I am not invisible. I am not weak. I will endure and I will find my place." The words were both a promise and a lifeline, a reminder that I could survive, even in a house that seemed determined to break me. Days turned into weeks, and the subtle pressure continued. Vivian's methods became more elaborate, involving not only staff but distant relatives and business associates. Every action I took was scrutinized, every word weighed, and every gesture interpreted. I began to feel as though I were constantly performing, trapped in a role I had not auditioned for, yet could not abandon. Ethan remained my anchor, but even he was limited in his ability to intervene. His love was steadfast, but the power dynamics of his family were intricate and relentless. I realized that my survival depended not only on patience, but also on strategy, cunning, and resilience. I had to learn to navigate a world that measured worth in wealth, status, and obedience, rather than love, kindness, or integrity. One evening, I discovered a hidden letter addressed to Ethan, its envelope embossed with gold. Inside were instructions, subtle warnings, and reminders of family expectations. The message was clear. I was never truly wanted, only tolerated. My presence in the Holloway mansion was conditional, dependent on my ability to conform, to endure, and to remain unseen in the ways that mattered. I sat on the floor, the letter trembling in my hands, the weight of realization pressing down on me. Everything I had endured, every glance, every whisper, every subtle correction, was part of a carefully orchestrated plan to assert control. Vivian's power was silent but absolute, and I was caught in its web. Tears fell freely that night, uncontrolled and raw. I mourned not only for the woman I had been, but for the life I had imagined, for the love I had believed could conquer all, and for the harsh reality that awaited me in the Holloway mansion. Yet even in despair, I found a spark of defiance. I whispered to myself, "I will not vanish quietly. I will carve a place for myself, even if it must be from the shadows of their indifference. I am Lillian Moore, and I will survive." The following days, I began implementing small strategies to assert my presence without provoking confrontation. I learned to anticipate Vivian's moves, to subtly redirect staff without drawing attention, to maintain composure even under the sharpest scrutiny. Each small success was a quiet rebellion, a reclaiming of agency in a house that seemed determined to strip me of it. Despite these victories, the emotional toll was immense. Every glance from Vivian, every whispered comment from Clara, every anxious sigh from Ethan reminded me that I was precariously balanced in a world where love was insufficient, patience was tested, and resilience was essential. The mansion, with all its grandeur, was a crucible, and I was being forged within it, stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. I realized that survival required more than endurance. It required observation, cunning, subtlety, and a willingness to act when necessary. Each day, I refined my approach, learning how to navigate the silent wars within the household, how to maintain my dignity, and how to reclaim pieces of my identity that Vivian sought to control. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I reflected on my journey. I had come from Willow Creek with dreams of love, hope, and simplicity. I had married Ethan with the belief that love could bridge gaps, soften pride, and melt indifference. Yet the Holloway mansion had taught me that the world operated on rules far different from those of my childhood. And yet, despite the betrayals, the subtle manipulations, and the relentless pressure, I remained. I had endured, adapted, and begun to assert myself. I whispered into the darkness, "I am Lillian Moore. I am a wife, a woman, and I will survive. They may try to break me, but they will never own me." And so, dear listener, the web tightened, the stakes grew higher, and the path ahead became more treacherous. But I was ready. I had learned that even in the coldest, most controlled world, strength, patience, and quiet strategy could carve a space for survival, dignity, and perhaps even triumph. The Holloway mansion was no longer a house to me. It was a battlefield. Every step I took, every smile I forced, every word I spoke felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of invisible knives. I had learned the subtle art of surviving in this gilded cage, but survival came with a cost. My innocence, my naivety, and at times my peace of mind. Ethan tried to ease my burden. He would hold my hand at night, whisper that everything would be fine, that his love for me was unwavering. But even his warmth could not shield me from Vivian's ever-present gaze. Her control was quiet, surgical, and unrelenting. It was as though the mansion itself was her instrument, each room a stage where my failures, no matter how small, were amplified for her private satisfaction. The turning point came one rainy afternoon. I had been preparing for a small family gathering, a few close friends of the Holloways who were visiting from Lowe's Angels. I had chosen the menu with care, practiced my table etiquette, and ensured that every detail, down to the placement of the silverware, was perfect. I thought that perhaps, this time, I could earn a small measure of respect. But Vivian had other plans. From the moment the guests arrived, her eyes followed me like a hawk. She made subtle adjustments to the staff's actions, whispered instructions with that disarming smile, and ensured that every movement I made was observed. I felt my chest tighten with tension, every nerve on edge, and yet I smiled, poured drinks, and served food as gracefully as I could. The guests complimented the meal, unaware of the silent war playing out behind the polite conversation. Vivian, however, wasted no opportunity to remind everyone that I was an outsider. "This is Lillian," she said, her voice honeyed but precise. "She comes from Oregon, a quaint little town. Isn't it wonderful how she tries to adapt?" Her words were seemingly innocent, but I knew the sting they carried. My origins had become a weapon, and I was on the receiving end. Later that evening, I found Ethan in the study, his face lined with worry. "I hate seeing you like this," he murmured, pulling me into his arms. "I wish I could protect you from everything, from her, from the expectations, from the constant scrutiny." I held him tightly, feeling the warmth of his embrace, the one anchor in a storm that never seemed to end. "Love isn't enough here, Ethan," I whispered. "It can't protect me. I have to find a way to survive on my own." It was then that I realized I could no longer remain passive. I had to observe, anticipate, and act. I began studying Vivian's patterns, noting her routines, her subtle communications with staff, and the ways she manipulated even the smallest situations to her advantage. I started to plan my moves, to reclaim small victories, and to protect the fragments of myself that she had not yet claimed. One afternoon, while organizing the library, I overheard a conversation between Clara Jennings and another staff member. "She's trying so hard," Clara said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But she'll never truly belong here. Mother's right, she's not Holloway." My heart sank. Even those I thought were allies were instruments of Vivian's silent war. Betrayal lurked in every corner, and trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. The weeks that followed were a relentless test of endurance. Vivian's subtle manipulations became more intricate. She involved distant relatives, business associates, and even friends in her orchestrations, ensuring that every word I spoke, every gesture I made, was scrutinized, dissected, and evaluated. The mansion, once a place of beauty and warmth, had become a theater of silent judgment and constant challenge. One evening, Ethan and I attended a charity gala, an event Vivian had insisted we host. I spent hours preparing, selecting a gown, practicing my speech, and rehearsing polite conversation. I hoped that my efforts would be noticed, that perhaps Vivian would allow a moment of pride for me. But from the moment we arrived, her presence loomed over me. She whispered instructions to the staff, subtly redirected my actions, and made tiny adjustments that undermined my confidence. I forced a smile, moving with grace, masking the fury and humiliation simmering inside me. Guests praised the event, complimented the food, and admired the decorations, oblivious to the silent tension. Vivian, however, found subtle ways to remind everyone of my outsider status. Every word, every gesture was calculated to reinforce the hierarchy, to ensure that I remained aware of my place in the family. Returning home that night, I felt the weight of isolation pressing down on me. The mansion, with all its grandeur, had become a labyrinth of invisible threats. Even Ethan's love, though constant and unwavering, could not protect me from the subtle cruelty that permeated every corner. I realized that survival required not only patience and resilience, but also strategy, cunning, and careful observation. Determined to reclaim some measure of control, I began implementing small strategies. I learned to anticipate Vivian's instructions, subtly guide the staff without drawing attention, and assert my presence in ways that were invisible to her scrutiny. Each small victory was a reclaiming of agency, a quiet rebellion against the invisible chains that bound me. Despite these efforts, the emotional toll was immense. Every glance from Vivian, every whispered comment from Clara, every hesitant sigh from Ethan reminded me that I was precariously balanced in a world that measured worth in wealth, status, and obedience, rather than love, kindness, or integrity. The mansion had become a crucible, forging me into someone stronger, sharper, and more resilient than I had ever imagined. One night, I discovered a hidden letter addressed to Ethan, its envelope embossed with gold. Inside were instructions, subtle warnings, and reminders of the family's expectations. The message was unmistakable. I was tolerated, never truly wanted. My presence in the Holloway mansion was conditional, dependent on my ability to conform, endure, and remain unseen in the ways that mattered. I sank to the floor, the letter trembling in my hands, the weight of realization pressing me down. Everything I had endured, every glance, every whisper, every subtle correction, was part of a carefully orchestrated plan to assert control. Vivian's power was silent but absolute, and I was caught in its web. Tears fell freely that night, raw and unrestrained. I mourned not only for the woman I had been, but for the life I had imagined, for the love I had believed could conquer all, and for the harsh reality of the Holloway mansion. Yet even in despair, I found a spark of defiance. I whispered to myself, I will not vanish quietly. I will carve a place for myself, even if it must be from the shadows of their indifference. I am Lillian Moore, and I will survive. The following days, I refined my strategies. I learned how to anticipate Vivian's moves, how to subtly assert myself without provoking open confrontation, and how to maintain composure under the sharpest scrutiny. Each successful maneuver, no matter how minor, was a quiet victory, a reclaiming of my identity in a house designed to erase it. And yet, even with these small triumphs, the mansion remained a place of constant vigilance and emotional strain. Every glance, every whispered word, every hesitant sigh was a reminder that love alone was insufficient, patience alone was tested, and resilience alone was essential. I began documenting small observations in my journal, carefully noting patterns, behaviors, and opportunities for subtle resistance. It became my secret arsenal, a way to navigate the treacherous waters of the Holloway world with clarity and foresight. Each entry reinforced my resolve. Each reflection reminded me of the woman I was determined to remain. Through these quiet battles, I began to understand something profound. Power in the Holloway mansion was silent, pervasive, and invisible. To survive, I needed not only endurance but also intellect, strategy, and patience. Love and loyalty were precious but insufficient tools in a world where subtlety reigned supreme. And so, I continued to endure, adapt, and reclaim my place. I had come from Willow Creek with dreams of love, hope, and simplicity, and though the Holloway mansion challenged every expectation, I refused to vanish. I whispered to the night, "I am Lillian Moore. I am a wife, a woman, and I will survive. They may try to break me, but they will never own me." The shadows of betrayal loomed ever closer, the stakes grew higher, and the challenges became more intricate. Yet I was ready. I had learned that even in the coldest, most controlled world, strength, patience, and careful strategy could carve a space for survival, dignity, and perhaps even triumph. The Holloway mansion had begun to feel less like a home and more like a stage where I was constantly performing, every gesture scrutinized, every word measured, every emotion monitored. It was exhausting, soul-crushing, and yet I had no choice but to continue. The alternative, confrontation without preparation, was dangerous. Vivian's power was subtle but absolute, and she had perfected the art of silent control. Ethan was my solace, my quiet refuge in the storm. But even his presence could not fully shield me from the relentless manipulation and judgment that surrounded us. I loved him with a depth I had never imagined, and I trusted him completely, yet I realized that even the strongest love could not erase the invisible chains of the Holloway world. The chapter of betrayal that began to unfold did not come from Vivian, at least not directly. It came from someone I had trusted implicitly, Claire Donovan, a distant cousin who had arrived in San Francisco under the guise of visiting family. She was polite, charming, and seemingly kind, someone who laughed at my jokes and offered compliments that felt genuine. I allowed myself to believe she was a friend, a rare ally in a house designed to isolate me. But one rainy afternoon, as I was preparing tea in the kitchen, I overheard Claire speaking with a staff member. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "She thinks she can fit in here," Claire said, a sly smile playing at her lips. "But she doesn't understand the Holloway way. Mother wants perfection and she's inadequate. Don't tell her I said anything, but she'll never belong." The words hit me like a slap, sharp and cold. Betrayal from someone I had considered a friend cut deeper than Vivian's calculated critiques. I felt a rush of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How could someone pretend to care, to be kind, and yet plot against me in whispers? I retreated to my room, heart pounding, tears threatening to spill. I had spent months navigating the subtle traps of the Holloway household, learning to endure, adapt, and reclaim small victories. And now, even my supposed allies were tools in the machinery of control. The mansion's walls seemed to close in, the chandeliers above casting long shadows, like silent witnesses to my frustration and despair. Ethan noticed my withdrawal that evening. "Lillian, what's wrong?" he asked, concern etched across his face. I hesitated, unsure how to explain the layers of manipulation, deceit, and silent warfare that had become my daily reality. "It's complicated," I murmured. "Some people, some friends aren't who they seem." He nodded slowly, his eyes clouded with worry. "I hate that you have to endure this," he said. "I wish I could fight all of them for you." I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "You fight in your way, Ethan. I fight in mine. We survive together, but each day I have to be smarter, quieter, and stronger than the last." The next weeks were a delicate dance of observation, patience, and subtle resistance. I began documenting patterns of Claire's behavior, noting her interactions with staff, her whispered comments, and her carefully timed actions. Every smile she directed at me now felt hollow, every compliment laced with ulterior motives. I realized that survival in this house required more than patience and endurance. It required vigilance, cunning, and strategic thinking. Vivian's influence remained pervasive, though her methods were evolving. She now employed indirect tactics, subtle gestures, silent reminders, and insinuations designed to undermine me without overt confrontation. She had learned, perhaps, that I was becoming resilient, that my patience had limits, and that my spirit could no longer be crushed by simple criticism. One evening, as I walked through the grand hallways, I overheard Vivian speaking to Claire in hushed tones. "She's persistent," Vivian said, her voice measured. "But remember, persistence does not equal belonging. Ensure she understands her place." I felt a chill run down my spine. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. It was orchestrated, layered, and relentless. Vivian had planted Claire in my path, ensuring that my trust would be exploited, that my patience would be tested, and that my spirit would be challenged. Yet in the face of this, I discovered a new strength. I began to anticipate the manipulations, to prepare responses, and to reclaim my agency in subtle ways. Every small success, a conversation redirected, a task completed flawlessly, a smile maintained under scrutiny, became a testament to my resilience. I was no longer merely enduring. I was asserting myself quietly, strategically, and with determination. Ethan remained my anchor, but I could sense the strain on him as well. He loved me, yet he was powerless to stop the subtle assaults, the layers of control, and the betrayals orchestrated by his mother and her chosen allies. I realized that our love, though unwavering, could only carry us so far. Beyond that, survival depended on my ability to navigate this world with intellect, subtlety, and courage. The mansion became a chessboard, and I began to see the moves before they happened. Claire would offer a compliment with a hidden barb. I would respond with politeness that masked awareness. Vivian would orchestrate a minor humiliation. I would endure it while quietly reclaiming control in another way. Every interaction became a calculated exercise, a test of endurance, strategy, and resilience. One evening, I discovered another letter, hidden among my personal belongings. This one was not from Vivian directly, but from a member of the extended family, warning Ethan about my presence, suggesting that my influence over him was growing too strong, and subtly encouraging division. The realization struck me like lightning. The Holloway family was a network, a carefully constructed web of control, manipulation, and silent dominance. Every person, every smile, every gesture was a thread, and I was entangled within it. I sank to my bed, tears falling freely, anger mingling with despair. The betrayal cut deep, but even in that moment I felt a spark of defiance. I whispered to myself, "I will not vanish quietly. I will carve a place for myself, even if it must be from the shadows. I am Lillian Moore, and I will survive." In the following days, I began subtle strategies to reclaim control. I observed, documented, and anticipated. I learned to counteract the manipulations without confrontation, to assert myself in ways invisible to my enemies, and to strengthen my position quietly. Every small victory was a reclamation of dignity, a reminder that even in a house built on control and betrayal, strength, intelligence, and courage could carve a path to survival. The emotional toll was immense. Every glance from Vivian, every whisper from Claire, every anxious look from Ethan reminded me of my precarious position. Yet I had learned that endurance, vigilance, and strategy could transform vulnerability into power. The mansion, with all its grandeur, was still a battleground, but I was no longer a passive player. I began documenting my observations in a hidden journal, noting patterns, behaviors, and opportunities for subtle resistance. It became my arsenal, a guide to navigating the treacherous waters of the Holloway world. Each entry reinforced my resolve. Each reflection reminded me of the woman I was determined to remain. Through this quiet resistance, I discovered a profound truth. Power in the Holloway mansion was silent, pervasive, and invisible. To survive, I needed more than love, patience, and endurance. I needed intellect, strategy, and the ability to act subtly. Each day, I reclaimed fragments of myself, asserting agency in ways that could not be easily suppressed. And so, I continued to endure, adapt, and navigate. I had come from Willow Creek with dreams of love, hope, and simplicity, and though the Holloway mansion challenged every expectation, I refused to vanish. I whispered to the night, "I am Lillian Moore. I am a wife, a woman, and I will survive. They may try to break me, but they will never own me. The shadows of betrayal loomed larger than ever, the stakes were higher, and the web of manipulation tightened. Yet I was ready. I had learned that even in the coldest, most controlled world, strength, patience, and strategic intelligence could carve a space for survival, dignity, and perhaps even triumph. The Holloway mansion was no longer just a place of living. It had become a crucible, forging my resilience, my patience, and my ability to navigate a world that seemed determined to break me. Each room, each corridor, each glance held a threat, a test, or a subtle reminder that I was an outsider. I had learned to move carefully, speak cautiously, and smile strategically. Yet even mastery of these small skills could not shield me from the ever-tightening grip of betrayal and manipulation that surrounded me. Ethan remained my anchor, though I could sense his frustration and helplessness. He loved me fiercely, but his love could not always protect me from the silent, pervasive forces of his family. His gaze often betrayed a longing to fight the system that had become our reality, but even he was aware that Vivian's influence extended into every corner of the mansion, into every action, and even into the minds of those who served us. It was during one of the rare quiet afternoons that the breaking point began to form. I had been preparing dinner for the household, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy, when I noticed subtle shifts in the staff's behavior. Their whispers, glances, and hesitations were sharper than usual. Something was brewing, and I could feel the tension coil in the air, thick and suffocating. Then came the first direct act of betrayal, Claire Donovan. I had caught her slipping a note to one of the staff members, its content veiled in politeness but heavy with insinuation. She had been plotting against me all along, carefully orchestrating small missteps and exaggerations, ensuring that my every action would be scrutinized and criticized. I confronted her in private, my hands trembling with anger. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice low but sharp. Claire's smile was sickly sweet, a mask of innocence hiding malice. "I'm just helping Vivian," she said smoothly. "It's not personal, Lillian. You just don't belong here. I'm only showing you the truth." The words cut deeper than I expected. Betrayal from someone I had considered a friend was more painful than the calculated cruelty of Vivian. This was personal, orchestrated, and deliberate. I felt the walls of the mansion closing in, the grandeur and wealth turning into chains that held me captive. That night, I confided in Ethan, pouring out the details of Claire's betrayal. His face darkened, frustration and helplessness etched in every line. "I hate that this is happening," he murmured, pulling me close. "I wish I could fix everything, but even I can't control their world completely." I rested my head on his shoulder, drawing strength from his warmth, yet the fire of defiance burned inside me. "Then I will fight in my own way," I whispered. "I will survive no matter what it takes. They may try to break me, but they will never own me." The following days became a delicate game of observation and strategy. I watched Claire, noting her movements, her interactions, and the way she manipulated others against me. I began to anticipate her moves, subtly counteracting her influence without drawing attention. Each small victory was a reclamation of agency, a reminder that even in a house built on control and manipulation, I had power. Vivian, ever the silent strategist, continued her subtle assaults. She orchestrated situations where I could falter, set traps using the staff and relatives, and delivered criticisms that were polite on the surface but stinging beneath. Each day, I had to navigate her invisible web, carefully choosing when to act, when to remain silent, and how to maintain my dignity. One evening, as I walked through the grand hallways, I overheard Vivian and Claire speaking quietly in the drawing room. "She's resilient," Vivian said, her tone measured, almost admiring. "But persistence does not equal belonging. Make sure she understands her limits." I felt a chill run through me. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined, orchestrated with precision and patience. Vivian had planted Claire, ensuring that my trust would be exploited, my patience tested, and my spirit challenged. The mansion was a battlefield, and I was learning slowly to navigate it without being destroyed. In the days that followed, I began documenting every interaction, noting patterns and behaviors, anticipating moves before they happened. My journal became my weapon, my strategy guide, and my sanctuary. Each entry reinforced my resolve, reminding me that while the Holloway mansion sought to control and diminish me, I still had agency, intelligence, and resilience. Then came a twist that shook me to the core. One evening, I discovered a letter hidden in the drawer of my bedroom. A letter not from Vivian, not from Claire, but from a distant relative warning Ethan about my influence, suggesting I was manipulating him and destabilizing the family. The letter implied that I was an outsider attempting to claim power within a household that had rules I could never understand. The realization was crushing. The Holloway world was more intricate and treacherous than I had imagined. Every person, every smile, every gesture could be a threat, a subtle reminder of my precarious place. The mansion, with its grandeur and elegance, had become a maze of betrayal, silent control, and emotional warfare. I sat on my bed, tears streaming down my face, feeling the weight of isolation, frustration, and anger. And yet, even in that darkness, a spark of defiance glowed. I whispered to the night, "I will not vanish quietly. I will carve a place for myself, even if it must be from the shadows of their indifference. I am Lillian Moore, and I will survive." The days that followed were a test of endurance and intelligence. I began subtle counter-strategies, observing Claire, carefully guiding staff interactions, and asserting myself without provoking confrontation. Each small victory was a reclamation of dignity, a demonstration that even in a house designed to break me, I could survive. Ethan noticed the change in me. "You're stronger than I realized," he said quietly one night, holding my hand. "Even in the face of all this, you remain unbroken." I smiled faintly, drawing strength from his words. "I have no choice," I replied. "Love gives me courage, but resilience keeps me alive. I have to endure, adapt, and reclaim my life." The mansion remained a battlefield, but I had begun to navigate it with clarity and foresight. I understood that survival required more than patience and love. It required observation, strategy, subtlety, and courage. Each day, I reclaimed fragments of my identity, asserting myself in ways that could not be easily suppressed. The emotional toll was immense. Every glance from Vivian, every whisper from Claire, every anxious look from Ethan reminded me of my precarious position. Yet I had learned that endurance, vigilance, and strategy could transform vulnerability into power. I was no longer a passive player. I was an active participant in my survival, slowly reclaiming my place in a house designed to diminish me. Through quiet observation, strategic action, and unwavering resilience, I began to see the web of betrayal and manipulation more clearly. Every small victory, every subtle act of defiance, became a building block for reclaiming my dignity, my identity, and my place within the Holloway household. And so I continued. I had come from Willow Creek with dreams of love, hope, and simplicity, and though the Holloway mansion challenged every expectation, I refused to vanish. I whispered to the darkness, "I am Lillian Moore. I am a wife, a woman, and I will survive. They may try to break me, but they will never own me." The shadows of betrayal were longer and more intricate than ever. The stakes were higher, and the challenges became more complex. Yet I was ready. I had learned that even in the coldest, most controlled world, strength, patience, and strategic intelligence could carve a space for survival, dignity, and perhaps eventual triumph. The Holloway mansion, with its grand chandeliers, polished marble floors, and ornate hallways, had always seemed to me like a fortress, beautiful, imposing, and unyielding. But over time, I realized that no fortress was invincible. Every castle has its cracks, every wall its weak points, and every empire its vulnerabilities. The longer I lived here, the more I understood that Vivian Holloway's control, while meticulous and pervasive, was not absolute. And for the first time, I sensed that the balance of power could shift. Ethan and I had grown closer, our bond deepened by shared adversity. The quiet evenings we spent in our private quarters, away from the polished scrutiny of the household, became my refuge. His love was unwavering, a steady flame in the storm of subtle manipulations, whispered betrayals, and silent criticisms. Yet even love, as comforting as it was, could not erase the daily grind of living under constant evaluation. The breaking point arrived one afternoon when I discovered that Claire Donovan, the cousin I had once trusted, had escalated her schemes. She had been meeting with certain staff members privately, spreading rumors about me, exaggerating my minor mistakes, and sowing seeds of distrust. But this time, she went further. She had sent a carefully worded note to Vivian, implying that I was undermining Ethan's position in the family, subtly questioning his judgment, and painting me as manipulative. I felt my blood run cold. The betrayal was not just personal anymore. It was strategic, designed to isolate me completely and weaken my position in the household. I realized that Vivian and Claire were orchestrating a campaign, a silent war intended to dismantle my confidence, my relationships, and my very sense of self. I confronted Claire privately in the library, my hands trembling with fury. "I trusted you," I said, my voice low but firm. "I confided in you, shared kindness, and you betrayed me. Why?" Claire's smile was cold and measured, a mask of politeness hiding malice. "I'm only loyal to the family, Lillian," she said smoothly. "It's nothing personal. You don't belong here, you never have." The words struck deeper than any direct criticism from Vivian. Betrayal from someone I had considered a friend was a wound that cut to the bone. I felt a surge of anger and helplessness. The mansion, with all its opulence, had become a battlefield, and I realized that I could trust no one completely, not even those who smiled at me and offered support. That night I poured my heart out to Ethan. "I feel trapped," I whispered, tears brimming. "Every step I take, every word I speak, it's all observed, judged, and manipulated. Even friends become enemies. How do I survive in a world like this?" Ethan held me tightly, his forehead resting against mine. "You survive because you are stronger than you realize," he said softly. "I know it's hard, but we will get through this together. I promise, Lillian, you are not alone." His words gave me comfort, but I knew that survival required more than love. It required strategy, resilience, and the ability to act with subtle intelligence. I could endure, adapt, and reclaim control only by understanding the dynamics of the household, predicting their moves, and asserting myself without provoking open confrontation. The following weeks became a delicate game of observation and strategy. I began to notice cracks in Vivian's meticulously constructed facade. Small inconsistencies in her directives, subtle miscommunications with staff, and rare moments of hesitation revealed that her control, while vast, was not absolute. Every empire has its weaknesses, I reminded myself, and perhaps this was my opportunity to reclaim some measure of agency. One afternoon, while reviewing the household schedules, I discovered an opportunity. Claire had instructed certain staff members to withhold information from me, believing it would create chaos in my tasks. Instead of allowing confusion to reign, I anticipated the oversight, subtly adjusted my plans, and completed my duties flawlessly. The staff members, surprised by my preparedness, began to see me in a new light, competent, resilient, and resourceful. Vivian noticed the change immediately. Her smile remained polite, but her eyes carried a hint of wariness. She had underestimated me, and the realization was almost palpable. The mansion, which had long been a place of silent control and intimidation, now felt slightly less imposing. I had discovered that even in a house designed to diminish me, I could carve small victories, assert agency, and challenge the invisible rules that bound me. Ethan's pride in me was evident. "You've become formidable," he said one evening, his eyes shining with admiration. "You're no longer just enduring. You're navigating, strategizing, and winning in ways they never expected." I smiled faintly, drawing strength from his words. "It's survival," I said softly. "But survival requires awareness, intelligence, and courage. I refuse to be broken here." Despite these victories, the emotional toll remained immense. Every glance from Vivian, every whisper from Claire, and every subtle critique reminded me of the precariousness of my position. Yet each challenge also reinforced my resilience, honed my strategic thinking, and strengthened my resolve. I began to realize that power in the Holloway mansion was not absolute. Even the most meticulously controlled environment had vulnerabilities, and I had begun to identify mine. The turning point arrived during a formal dinner, a gathering of extended family and business associates. Vivian had orchestrated the event meticulously, intending to display my supposed inadequacies while elevating her control. Claire whispered suggestions to staff, coordinated subtle interruptions, and ensured that my every action could be perceived as imperfect. But this time, I was ready. I anticipated the interruptions, subtly corrected potential mistakes before they happened, and maintained a poised, confident demeanor. The guests complimented the arrangements, the food, and my conduct, oblivious to the invisible tensions. Vivian's thinly veiled criticisms failed to land, and even Claire's whispered instructions could not derail the evening. For the first time, I sensed a shift in the balance of power. The mansion, once an unassailable fortress of control, now contained cracks I could navigate. I realized that the key to survival was not only endurance, but also strategic awareness, subtle influence, and quiet resilience. After the dinner, I retreated to my private quarters, exhausted but triumphant. I reflected on the months of subtle torment, betrayal, and manipulation. I had learned that even in the most controlled environments, one could find opportunities to assert agency, reclaim dignity, and survive with grace. Ethan joined me that night, his expression a mixture of relief and pride. "You handled tonight brilliantly," he said softly. "Even in the face of calculated sabotage, you maintained your composure and proved your capability." I leaned against him, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "It's not just about capability," I said quietly. "It's about survival, and survival requires courage, patience, and intelligence." The Holloway mansion remained a place of intricate dynamics, silent control, and hidden agendas. Yet for the first time, I felt a glimmer of empowerment. I had endured, adapted, and begun to assert myself. I had navigated betrayal, anticipated manipulation, and discovered vulnerabilities in even the most formidable structures. The walls of the mansion, once unyielding and imposing, had begun to feel slightly less confining. The silent battles I had fought, the subtle strategies I had employed, and the quiet victories I had claimed had shifted the balance, even if only slightly. I understood that the journey was far from over, but for the first time, I sensed that I was not merely surviving. I was beginning to shape my destiny within this house of power, control, and manipulation. I whispered to the night, my voice firm and resolute, "I am Lillian Moore. I am a wife, a woman, and I will survive. They may try to break me, but I will not vanish. I will carve my place here with dignity, intelligence, and strength." And so the turning point had arrived. The mansion, with all its grandeur and complexity, was still a battleground. The stakes were higher, the challenges more intricate, and the betrayals more insidious than ever. But I was ready. I had learned that even in the most controlled environments, resilience, strategy, and courage could carve a path toward survival, dignity, and eventual triumph. The Holloway mansion had witnessed months of tension, subtle manipulations, whispered betrayals, and silent wars. What had begun as a dream, a life with Ethan, a family to belong to, and a love to sustain, had become a maze of invisible chains. Yet in the darkest corridors of control, I had learned the true power of resilience, patience, and strategic awareness. The final chapter of this struggle was upon me, and I could feel the air thick with anticipation, challenge, and revelation. The morning began quietly, deceptively so. Vivian was orchestrating her usual routines with precision, Claire flitting around like a shadow, ensuring the household ran smoothly, but with subtle sabotages carefully hidden in plain sight. Every glance, every whisper, every movement felt deliberate. I watched, as I had learned to do, cataloging every nuance, every possible leverage point. I had grown stronger, sharper, and more aware. The months of subtle endurance, patient observation, and quiet victories had culminated in this day. I knew, at last, that I had the opportunity not only to survive, but to reclaim agency in the Holloway mansion. The first act came unexpectedly. Vivian, in her usual tone of polite authority, asked me to prepare a private meeting with extended family and business associates. The goal was unclear, but I recognized it as a chance, an arena where the stakes were high and visibility was at its peak. This was the moment to demonstrate competence, intelligence, and control, while subtly countering the manipulations that had been orchestrated against me for months. I prepared meticulously, anticipating Claire's interference and Vivian's subtle challenges. I delegated tasks strategically, ensuring the staff would follow my direction without alerting them to any confrontation. Each element of the preparation was calculated, every potential pitfall accounted for. For the first time, I felt not fear, but confidence. When the meeting began, Vivian attempted her usual tactics: subtle corrections, quiet insinuations, and veiled criticisms aimed to undermine me. Claire whispered suggestions to staff, trying to redirect attention or create minor errors. But this time, I was ready. Each challenge was anticipated, each subtle attack countered with grace, intelligence, and composure. I felt a quiet thrill as I realized that for the first time, I was navigating their maneuvers rather than reacting to them. The extended family and business associates observed, largely unaware of the intricate chess game unfolding. Compliments were exchanged, tasks executed flawlessly, and the event proceeded without any of the disruptions Vivian and Claire had planned. Even Vivian's sharpest comments, delivered with practiced politeness, were rendered ineffective by my preparation and strategic awareness. The final revelation came unexpectedly. While reviewing some documents during a private moment, I discovered undeniable evidence of Claire's orchestrations, including detailed notes, correspondences, and subtle manipulations she had attempted to conceal. Vivian's fingerprints were all over it: the careful strategy, the placement of obstacles, the psychological games. The betrayal was layered, sophisticated, and almost invisible. Yet now, it was in my hands. I faced a choice: confront them openly, risking escalation, or navigate the revelation strategically. I chose the latter. I documented everything carefully, prepared evidence, and waited for the opportune moment. Every move was calculated, every response measured, and every word carefully chosen. I would not react in anger, I would act with precision. That evening, Ethan noticed my calm intensity. "You're different," he said softly. "Stronger, sharper, more in control." I smiled faintly, feeling the weight of months of struggle in my chest. "It's not just strength, Ethan," I whispered. "It's understanding. They have power, but so do I in ways they cannot anticipate." The confrontation unfolded during a quiet family dinner. Vivian attempted her usual subtle domination. Claire tried to manipulate perceptions, but I remained poised, responding to each insinuation with quiet intelligence. Then, with calculated calm, I revealed the evidence of manipulation and betrayal: Claire's orchestrations, Vivian's interventions, and the subtle network of influence designed to undermine me. The room fell silent. Vivian's expression shifted from practiced composure to subtle shock. Claire's mask cracked, revealing the fear and panic beneath. For the first time, the meticulous control they had wielded so effectively was exposed, laid bare by patient observation, careful documentation, and unwavering resilience. Ethan's eyes met mine, pride and relief shining in his gaze. "You did it," he whispered. "You faced them and turned the tide." I felt a surge of vindication, but also a deeper realization. True power was not in domination, control, or manipulation. It was in patience, resilience, intelligence, and the courage to endure and reclaim agency in a world designed to strip it away. Vivian, ever composed, tried to recover, but the moment had shifted irreversibly. Claire's influence was neutralized, her schemes exposed. The staff, once manipulated and uncertain, began to see the shift in balance. The mansion, long a place of silent control and intimidation, now recognized that I was not only a participant but a strategist, capable of navigating and asserting influence in ways they had not anticipated. In the days that followed, the Holloway mansion began to change subtly. Vivian maintained her authority, but her control was no longer absolute. Claire's whispers and schemes ceased, replaced by cautious respect. The household adjusted to a new dynamic, one where my presence was acknowledged not as an outsider to be tolerated, but as a competent, intelligent, and resilient individual capable of navigating its complexities. Ethan and I found moments of quiet reflection, away from scrutiny, where we could breathe and simply exist. The mansion, with all its grandeur and history, no longer felt suffocating. It remained a complex world of relationships, expectations, and subtle power dynamics, but I had learned to navigate it, endure it, and shape my own path within it. I realized that survival had always been more than enduring cruelty or avoiding manipulation. It was about learning, adapting, observing, and asserting agency in subtle, strategic ways. It was about patience, intelligence, and the courage to face betrayal and emerge stronger. One evening, as I stood in the quiet of the mansion's garden, looking out at the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From Willow Creek to the Holloway Mansion, from naive trust to careful observation, from silent endurance to strategic triumph, I had transformed. I had faced betrayal, navigated manipulation, and reclaimed my dignity and agency. I whispered into the night, my voice steady and resolute. I am Lillian Moore. I am a wife, a woman, and I will survive. They may have tried to break me, but they did not succeed. I am here, unbroken, resilient, and strong. And this is my triumph. The Holloway Mansion, with all its grandeur, complexity, and history, had tested me in every possible way. Yet I had endured, adapted, and emerged not only intact, but empowered. The webs of betrayal, manipulation, and silent control had been navigated, the shadows of doubt and fear illuminated, and the fortress of influence shifted subtly but irreversibly. In the end, I realized that true victory was not in revenge, domination, or destruction. It was in resilience, intelligence, patience, and the quiet reclamation of one's dignity and agency. I had endured the shadows, faced betrayal, and emerged stronger, wiser, and unbroken. The mansion still stood, grand and imposing, but I had learned its patterns, recognized its vulnerabilities, and asserted my place within it. The journey had been arduous, emotional, and filled with unexpected twists, yet it had forged me into someone capable of navigating even the most complex, manipulative environments with grace and resilience. As I stood there watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I whispered one final affirmation, a testament to the journey, the struggle, and the triumph. I am Lillian Moore. I am a survivor. I am strong. I am here, and I will remain unbroken, resilient, and triumphant. And so, the Holloway Mansion, once a place of control, manipulation, and silent war, became a testament to endurance, intelligence, and quiet victory. I had faced betrayal, navigated challenges, and emerged with dignity intact. The shadows had been navigated, the walls of control subtly shifted, and the journey of survival and triumph was complete.